Hare Krishna. Today we will be discussing Chapter 6 of Srimad Bhagavad-Gita, Text 18, Translation. When the yogi, by practice of yoga, disciplines his mental activities and becomes situated in transcendence devoid of all material desires, he is said to have attained yoga. The activities of the yogi are distinguished from those of an ordinary person by his characteristic cessation from all kinds of material desires, of which such is the chi. The perfect yogi is so well disciplined in the activities of the mind that he can no longer be disturbed by any kind of a material desire. This perfectional stage can automatically be attained by the persons in Krishna Consciousness, as stated in Srimad Bhagavatam. King Ambarisha first of all engaged his mind on the lotus feet of the Lord Krishna. Then one after another he engaged his words in describing the transcendental qualities of the Lord, his hands in mopping the temple of the Lord, his ears in hearing the activities of the Lord, his eyes in seeing the transcendental form of the Lord, his body is in touching the bodies of the devotees, his sense of a smell is smelling the scents of the lotus flower offered to the Lord, his tongue in tasting the tulsi leaf offered at the lotus feet of the Lord, his legs in going to the places of pilgrimage and the temple of the Lord, his head in offering obeisances into the Lord, and his desires in executing the mission of the Lord. All these transcendental activities are quite befitting a pure devotee. This transcendental stage may be inexpressible subjectively by the followers of the impersonalist path, but it becomes very easy and practical for a person in Krishna consciousness, as is apparent in the above description of the engagements of Maharaja Ambarisha. Unless the mind is fixed on the lotus feet of the Lord by constant remembrance, such transcendental engagement are not practical in the devotional service of the Lord. Therefore, these prescribed activities are called archana, or engaging all the senses in the service of the Lord. The senses and the mind require engagement. Simple abnegation is not practical. Therefore, for the people in general, especially those who are not in the renounced order of their life, transcendental engagement of the senses and the mind as described above is a perfect process for transcendental achievement, which is called yukta in the Bhagavad-Gita. Text 19 translation. As a lamp in a wild, windless place does not waver, so the transcendentalist whose mind is controlled remains always steady in his meditation on the transcendental self. A truly Krishna conscious person, always absorbed in the transcendence in constant, undisturbed meditation on his worshipable Lord, is as steady as a lamp in the windless place. Text 20 and 23. The stage of perfection is called trance or samadhi, when one's mind is completely restrained from material mental activities by practice of yoga. This is characterized by one's ability to see the self by the pure mind and to relish the rejoice in the self. In the joyous state, one is situated in boundless transcendental happiness and enjoys himself through transcendental senses established. Thus one never departs from the truth, and upon gaining this he thinks there is no greater gain. Being situated in such a position, one is never shaken even in the midst of greatest difficulty. This indeed is actual freedom from all miseries arising from material contact. By practice of yoga, one becomes gradually detached from material concepts. This is a primary characteristic of a yoga principle. And after this, one becomes situated in trance or samadhi, which means that the yogi realizes the super soul through the transcendental mind and intelligence, without any of the misgivings of identifying the self with the super self. Yoga practice is more or less based on the principles of a Patanjali system. Some unauthorized commentators try to identify the individual soul with the super soul, and the monist thinks that this to be liberation. But they don't understand the real purpose of Patanjali system of yoga. There is an acceptance of a transcendental pleasure in the Patanjali system, but the monists do not accept this transcendental pleasure out of fear of jeopardizing the theory of oneness. The duality of knowledge and the knower is not accepted by the non-dualists. But in this verse, transcendental pleasure realized through transcendental sense is accepted, and this is corroborated by the Patanjali Muni, the famous exponent of the yoga system. The great Sage declares in the Yoga Sutras, this Siddhi Sakti or internal potency or transcendental Purushartha means material religiosity, economic development, sense gratification. And at the end, the attempt to become one with the Supreme. This oneness with the Supreme is called Kaivalyam by the monist, but according to Patanjali, this Kaivalyam is an internal or transcendental potency by which the living entity becomes aware of the constitutional position. In the words of Lord Chaitanya, this state of affirmance is called Chetodarpana Marjanam, or clearance of the impure mirror of the mind. This clearance is actually liberation, or Bhava Madhavangi Nirvapanam. The theory of nirvana also preliminary corresponds with this principle. In the Bhagavatam, this is called Swarupena Vyavastiti. The Bhagavad-Gita also confirms the situation in this verse. After nirvana or material cessation, there is the manifestation of the spiritual activities or devotional service of the Lord, known as Krishna Consciousness. In the words of Bhagavatam, Swarupena Vyavastiti, this is all real life of a living entity. Maya or illusion is the condition of spiritual life. Contaminated by material infection, liberation from this material infection does not mean destruction of the original eternal position of the living entity. Patanjali also accepts this by this word Kaivalyam. This Siddhi Sakti or transcendental pleasure is a real life. This is confirmed in Vedanta Sutras as Anandamayo Vyasat. This natural transcendental pleasure is the ultimate goal of yoga and is easily achieved by execution of devotional service or Bhakti Yoga. Bhakti Yoga will be vividly described in the 7th chapter of Bhagavad-Gita. In the yoga system as described in this chapter, there are two kinds of samadhi called Samprajnata Samadhi or Asamprajnata Samadhi. When one becomes situated in the transcendental position by various philosophical research, it is called Samprajnata Samadhi. In the Asamprajnata Samadhi, there is no longer any connection with the mundane pleasure, for one is then transcendental to all sort of happiness derived from the senses. When the yogi is once situated in that transcendental position, he is never shaken from it. Unless the yogi is able to reach this position, he is unsuccessful. Today's so-called yoga practice, which involves various sense pleasures, is contradictory. The yogi indulging in a sex and intoxication is a mockery. Even those yogis who are attracted by the siddhis, perfections in the process of yoga, are not perfectly situated. If the yogis are attracted by the byproduct of the yoga, then they cannot attain the stage of perfection. As it is stated in this verse, persons therefore indulging in making show practice of gymnastic feats or siddhis should know that the aim of yoga is lost in that way. The best practice of yoga in this age of Krishna is Krishna Consciousness, which is not baffling. A Krishna conscious person is so happy in his occupation that he does not aspire after any other happiness. There are many impediments, especially in the age of hypocrisy, to practicing Hatha Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, Jnana Yoga. But there is no such problem in executing Karma Yoga or Bhakti Yoga. As long as the material body exists, one has to meet the demands of the body, namely eating, sleeping, defending and mating. But a person who is in a pure Bhakti Yoga or Krishna consciousness does not arouse the senses while meeting the demands of the body, rather he accepts the bare necessities of life, making the best use of bad bargain, and enjoys the transcendental happiness in Krishna consciousness. He is callous towards incidental occurrences such as an accident, diseases, scarcity, and even the death of a most dear relative, but he is also always alert to execute his duties in Krishna consciousness or Bhakti Yoga. Accidents never deviate him from his duty, as stated in Bhagavad-Gita. He endures all such incidental occurrences because he knows that they come and go and do not affect his duties. In this way, he achieves the highest perfection in yoga practice. Text 24 translation. One should engage oneself in the practice of yoga with undeviating determination and faith. One should abandon, without exception, all material desires born of false ego and thus control all the senses on all sides of the mind. The yoga practitioner should be determined and should patiently prosecute a practice without deviation. One should be sure of success at the end and pursue this course with a great perseverance, not becoming discouraged if there is any delay in the attainment of success. Success is sure for a rigid practitioner. Regarding Bhakti Yoga, Rupa Goswami says, the process of Bhakti Yoga can be executed successfully with full-hearted enthusiasm, perseverance and determination by following the prescribed duties in the association of devotees and by engaging completely in activities of goodness. As for determination, one should follow the example of the sparrow who lost her eggs in the waves of the ocean. A sparrow laid her eggs on the shore of the ocean, but the big ocean carried away the eggs on its waves. The sparrow became very upset and asked the ocean to return her eggs. The ocean did not even consider her appeal, so the sparrow decided to dry up the ocean. She began to pick out the water in her small beak, and everyone laughed at her for her impossible determination. The news of her activity spread, and at last Garuda, the gigantic bird carried of Lord Vishnu, heard it. He became compassionate towards his small sister bird, and so he came to see the sparrow. Garuda was very pleased by the determination of a small sparrow, and he promised to help. Thus Garuda at once asked the ocean to return her eggs, lest he himself take up the work of the sparrow. The ocean was frightened at his and returned the eggs. Thus the sparrow became happy by the grace of Garuda. Similarly, the practice of yoga, especially Bhakti Yoga and Krishna Consciousness, may appear to be a very difficult job, but if anyone follows the principles with a great determination, the Lord will surely help, for God helps those who help themselves. Text 25 translation. Gradually, step by step, with full conviction, one should become situated in trance by means of intelligence, and thus mind should be fixed on the self alone and should think of nothing else. By proper conviction and intelligence, one should gradually cease sense activities. This is called pratyaraha, the mind being controlled by conviction. Meditation and cessation of the senses should be situated in trance or samadhi. At that time, there is no longer any danger of becoming engaged in the material conception of life. In other words, although one is involved with a matter as long as the material body exists, one should not think about sense gratification. One should think of no pleasure aside from the pleasure of the Supreme Self. This state is easily attained by directly practicing Krishna Consciousness. Text 26 translation. From whatever and wherever the mind wanders due to its flickering and unsteady nature, one must certainly withdraw it and bring it back under the control of the Self. The nature of the mind is flickering and unsteady, but a self-realized yogi has to control the mind. The mind should not control him. One who controls the mind and therefore the senses as well is called Goswami or Swami, and one who is controlled by the mind is called Godasha, or the servant of the senses. A Goswami knows the standard of sense happiness, in transcendental sense happiness and sense, and engaged in the service of Hrishikesha, or the supreme owner of the senses Krishna. Serving Krishna with a purified senses is Krishna Consciousness. That is a way of bringing the senses under full control. What is more, that is the highest perfection of yoga practice. Which ends the text and explanation of text 26 of Srimad Bhagavad-Gita, Chapter 6. Hare Krishna. Thank you so much. Keep listening.